I don't know, but in case you don't, my name's Pete Cudney. I'm one of the training and coaching specialists with the UVM Child Welfare Training Partnership. And I'm going to click record now. Maybe I have to stop sharing to find
I already did it, Pete. I'm sorry. I was sneaky and I did it.
That's excellent. Great. Thank you. So just for everyone to know, we're recording the training and it'll then live on our website so that you or others can access it later. And we can use the chat feature. When I do my screen share, it probably takes you to full screen, but if you double click, whoops, if I double click, it moves my slides. But if you double click, I think you'll be able to see the chat. And so Cassie will monitor the chat. And so ask questions in that format anytime you want. I'll probably just kind of deliver content and then toward the end, there'll be breakout rooms for discussion. And then when we come back together, there could be, opportunity for questions then. But along the way, if you have a question that pertains to a concept I'm talking about right then, type it in the chat. Cassie will unmute herself and just ask the question on your behalf, and I'm happy to respond. So go ahead and do that, and just keep in mind that the chats get recorded as well, even the private chats. So even if you privately chat with one other person, that'll get captured by our recording. So we are. I have to lose my mouse. Okay, so we are going to cover a brief review of safety culture. I have to remind myself I'm steeped in it all the time, but I have to remind myself that for other folks, it may have been a while, if ever, that you've even been a part of conversations about safety culture. So I'll review what it is.
And here, Jed's out in his cabin.
I will, you mute folks, Cassie. I'll review three. Am I muted? No, okay. Three specific concepts. So the first one is really a concept, team as secure base. And then the next two are practices, the practice of huddles and the practice of the use of SBAR to structure conversations. And then there'll be breakout room discussion. It'll just be random. You'll just be randomly put into a room with other folks. So you'll see some people you know and some you don't. And then right at the tail end, there'll be time for you to just do a survey on this training. So hopefully that gives you a lay of the land for what we're going to cover. So as I cover concepts, I would encourage you to just jot down notes for the breakout room discussion at the end. And so the questions that I have posed for the breakout discussions at the end, are you using this? So whatever it is I'm talking about, are you using this in your team or in your district? If so, how are you doing it? And in particular, what does it look like in terms of people's habits and practices? And I'll talk more about what I mean by habits and practices. What are the differences? And then does this concept or this practice give you ideas to potentially improve your safety culture in your team or in your district? And that's what we'll want people to orient toward in the breakout discussion. So just capture notes along the way. For review, right? So child protection, the field of child protection is a field that involves really high risk, high consequence decision-making, really complicated situations, a ton of nuance. It's also a stressful field, and we know that good, clear decision-making is negatively impacted by our stress level. We also know that we have biases. I mean, I speak for myself, but hopefully generally you agree. I mean, I've grown up in America, and so unfortunately, I'm more classist, more racist, more sexist than ageist than I'd like to be. And so decision-making in a high-risk, high-consequence field that's influenced by stress and biases, that's problematic. And so especially when those decisions are left to an individual to make, right? When the individual has to interpret all of the policies and the best practice guidance and the gray nuances of the case that aren't addressed by specific policies, it's gonna be really complicated. And if they're stressed, and if, like me, if you have your own biases, the more you're making those decisions in isolation, the more problematic it becomes, the less we can ensure safe outcomes for children. And so there's a responsibility that organizations have to design their practices to essentially force shared responsibility, to not leave it alone to individuals to manage their own stress or make complex decisions in isolation. And so it's from that reality that the field of safety culture has evolved. So before I talk about safety culture in particular, culture in general, so think about your identification with your culture. So a little bit about myself. I'm from an Italian-American family. I identify that as a part of my culture. The values that go with that for me are, my sense of what it means to be Italian-American is that we value family, we value food, good food, we value gathering together, we value kind of vibrancy, being larger than life, talking with our hands, and it's a culture that is a part of my identity. It's something that I really value. It's something that was passed along to me just through kind of habits of my family members, but also through explicitly passing along certain traditions. In my family, there's a certain way that you make your pasta sauce, and there's a certain way that you make your meatballs, and I intend to pass that along, to my children as well. So culture is a collection of values, of behaviors, of habits that hopefully we identify with, that we value, that we want to keep alive, and that helps us understand that we're part of a larger group. Safety culture is a culture within an organization. All organizations have cultures. Whether those are intentional cultures or more haphazard is an important question. So an organization has a safety culture when the values, the practices, the habits are really centered vigilantly on maintaining the safety for that professional group, and in our case, for the children that we serve. And safety culture it's a deliberate culture. It's a culture where we don't leave it up to random chance as an organization that this is the culture that will develop. We deliberately cultivate this culture by hopefully by training ourselves to have practices organizationally that we agree to follow, that orient us toward the importance of safety, towards slowing down to consider safety over and over and over again for safe outcomes, and that those practices are used consistently enough so that they start to become habitual for us. We still need the practices to remind us so that we're not totally relying on having developed healthy habits. I mean, that's why we call it practice, is that it's something that we need to continue engaging and practicing, with the goal being that it becomes habitual. So I'll break that down a little bit more as we move forward. So here's a visual I created for safety culture. So if you think about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, where before we can attend to higher needs, we have to ensure that we have our basics taken care of. So safety culture, this surrounding environment, should be habits and organized practices that attend to our physical safety, that of professionals and children, the psychological safety of emotional regulation, healthy relationships, healthy communication, safety organized practices, and ultimately safety, with the idea being that if we haven't ensured something lower in this foundational need, then we really have to do that before we can easily move on to the higher order safety practices. So some examples of habits and practices. So with the bottom here, physical safety practices. So a habit might be washing our hands, right? We used to use it as an example in emergency rooms. Now, given the pandemic, it's a daily part of our life. So some of us may have developed better habits at this point of washing our hands throughout the day than others. The practice that goes along with this would be an organization creating hand hygiene stations, ensuring that there are signs and practices and checklists that remind us, as well as clients, that we need to wash our hands pretty regularly, it would be providing soap and disinfectant, right? So that would be an organizational practice to help reinforce the habit. At the level of psychological safety related to emotional regulation, some of you probably have a habit of asking another person, how are you doing? That might be one of the first things that you do before you dive into the work at hand. And some people may have developed that habit of just checking in. How are you doing emotionally? Let's connect on that level before we move on. In teams, you may have practices like check-ins, that before you begin talking about your agenda, as a team, you just check in. So that's an example, again, of an organizational practice to try to reinforce the safety habit. At the level of communication, some people may have habits of always forcing yourself to have the tough conversation with another person directly, straight to them, as opposed to, you know, talking to colleagues about that third person. That's a tough habit to develop, direct communication. And so we have some practices like trainings related to courageous conversations or closing the loop, right? Some districts and teams have developed operating agreements where they say, you can talk to me about your frustration with our colleague, but only if you agree ahead of time that after this conversation, you're going to follow up with them and close the loop. So and then safety organized practices, of course, we have our structured decision-making tools in order to try to build our habits. So that's the overview of safety culture. In Vermont, what we understand is that Vermont is actually one of the states that's at the cutting edge of really thinking deliberately about safety culture. And so here's some of our timelines. So if I have this stuff correctly, in 2016, policies 250 and 251 were enacted, and they cover a broad range. Policy 250 created the position of staff safety manager, as well as a lot of the practices and protocols to maintain staff safety, to have staff safety consults. Similarly, the HOPE team at around the same time. So these are really good examples of leadership, acknowledging the need, dedicating resources, putting a lot of time into creating policies and practices with staff safety, physical and psychological safety in mind. Vermont is a part of a national partnership. It's called the National Partnership for Child Safety Collaborative. That's with Mike Cull's group. If you were at the statewide conference this past summer, then you saw Mike Cull speak. Mike Cull's group has also offered us a safety culture survey, which you had an opportunity to complete. And we've gotten the results back from that. I was hoping to review those in this training, but it's more than we'll cover today. But that safety culture survey, the results of that are being taken up by the Safety Culture Work Group, which is a really dynamic work group that lately has been meeting every 2 to 3 weeks to talk about our small tests of change related to safety culture practices in our districts. And the partnership, the national partnership, is also training Vermont on the use of the SSIT, the Safe Systems Improvement Tool. And then we're trying to infuse safety culture concepts into our training. So there's a lot that's been going on in Vermont, and through this national partnership, we're learning from other states, but believe it or not, they're also going to be learning a lot from us, because it appears that we're one of the states that's out in front with this kind of stuff. From that collaborative group, Mike Cull and Tiffany Lindsay and the Parade Foundation from Chapin Hall, University of Chicago, they've put together what's called the Team First Field Guide. Here's a link to it, and I think Cassie's going to post the link in the chat as well, so that if you wanted to copy that, you could have access to that PDF. We can also, I think it's also on our FSD SharePoint. And two of the practices that I'll talk about today, huddles and the use of SBAR, come directly out of the Team First Field Guide. So the practices and habits of safety culture, I think, can most easily be thought of as fitting into these 4 domains. We need to have practices, organizational practices that help us develop personal habits around regulating our own emotion and helping one another regulate emotion. We have to have practices and habits of effective professional communication, talking directly about things even when those conversations are challenging, organizing our consultation conversations so that they're efficient. We need to have practices and habits that force us to slow down enough to plan ahead at key decision points in a case. And then we have to have practices that force us to pause and reflect backwards on the practices that we've been using so that we can ensure that they will best result in safety outcomes. So those 4 domains: emotional regulation, effective communication, planning ahead, and reflecting back. And we'll touch on some of those today. Okay, so this idea of team as secure base is the first of the 3 that I want to highlight. This was presented really briefly at the statewide conference. I know that it's talked about in some districts and probably not yet in all districts. So this came from research from these 3 women here at the bottom. I guess it's 4 women: Biggert, Ward, Cook, and Schofield. And they did research where they interviewed child protection workers about what it is that you need from your unit team in order to do your best work. And what they found was that what family service workers identified fell into the same categories as what a child needs from their family to have a secure enough attachment base so that they can go out into the world on their own and function well. And it's these 5 categories. And so my question for you as I talk about this is, could you reflect on your experience in your district office and in your unit team? To what extent do you have habits as individuals? To what extent do you have practices that are set in place as a team that help everyone know that you're not in it alone? That at this top, that if you have a need and you put that need out there somehow, that someone's going to be available to respond and join with you on that need. So availability, that your team is sensitive to the emotions, the feelings, the difficult challenges that can come up in this work, that a team can tolerate a team member being angry or being feeling hurt by the actions of another or the actions of the team, that there can be sensitivity and tolerance for those difficult emotions without defense reactions, without other team members becoming overwhelmed by the emotion or taking it personally or feeling attacked. Teams, in order to provide what workers need, they have to have this ability to be sensitive and tolerant of a wide range of emotions. Does your team provide you with acceptance? In addition to having really high standards, high professional standards, does your team also accept that none of us are perfect and that you don't always have to be strong, that you can make mistakes? Do you feel like you can go to your team and say, I think I blew it on this decision, and that you won't be judged for that? Cooperation. In addition to people being available to you when you have a need, are they willing to add some of the stuff on your list to their list? Are they willing to jump in with you and do some of the work? And then finally, team membership. Does it feel like the whole team honors the relationships with one another equally? If there are events that are planned, is everyone included? If someone's sick for the day and therefore not in a team call, is that acknowledged? Does the team wait until everyone's present in order to make decisions about operating agreements, those kinds of things? Do you know that you are valued and that you belong to something larger than yourself? This, in that pyramid of needs, this is going to be the foundational level for us that really rises just above physical safety. This isn't a practice, right? This is a set of concepts that each team should be mindful of, and then organize practices within your team that ensure that you're addressing this as much as possible, that you're building this for your team, and that you're responding to any times where someone felt like there was a lack of one of these issues. So that's the concept of team as secure base. I'm going to continue on to the next concept and trust that if you have questions, you'll post them and Cassie will let me know.
I'm going to interrupt you.
Yeah.
It's not a question. It's just a reflection that's come up in some other conversations, is that for FSWs and supervisors, for the most part, there are defined teams, but as we kind of move up the leadership hierarchy, teams become a little more amorphous. So for example, district directors, right, is your team, your leadership team, or your directors in other places. For central office folks, especially consultants, are you the only person in your role? It can become tricky even to know where you're trying to build that secure base. And so identifying that can be a piece of this as well.
Thank you, Cassie. That's critical. Yeah, that might be step one for some of us. So yeah, if you're reflecting on this and you have what Cassie's talking about, an uncertainty about who exactly your team is, that may be something to raise up with other people, because we should all have our people that we can go to. Thanks, Cassie. All right, I'm going to continue with my rapid fire. Like I said in the beginning, this is complicated work, and in the best of times, which when we're not in a pandemic, the best of times, even then, even with many years of historical experience of how to do this work, with many years of judicial practice that informs court decisions, as well as statutes and policies, years of research about best practices. Even then, there's a ton of this work that is gray. There's a ton of this work where workers have to use your own adaptive skills to make subjective judgments about what direction to go in. During this pandemic, everything is new. We don't have years of any of the research, any of the law practice. We don't have case law. And so everyone's figuring this out as we go. And so during normal times, and especially now, the more you don't know how your individual practice habits match those of other colleagues on your team, the more you don't know that, the more you're at professional risk of operating separately from what the norm is. And so I talk with teams about having norming conversations. And it's not always a case consultation. It's not always help with a direction in this particular case. Sometimes it is, but sometimes it's simply a practice discussion. I'm wondering how everyone is currently interpreting the new guidance that came out within a week around recent changes to parent-child contact. Because when I read that guidance, it feels to me like I could justify going in this direction with this family or this direction with this family. And so in order to get from a situation where most of the colleagues in a unit team are here and there's one or two outliers, to a situation where we talk and we readjust, and now we know that we're operating closely to one another, really the only way to get here is to have open conversations with your entire team. You can have a conversation with a supervisor alone and say, here's what I'm thinking about the decisions with this family related to parent-child contact. But that supervisor may not know how everyone else is practicing as well. And so this brings us to the concept of huddles. Huddles are from the field guide. So picture, you've either seen it live or you've seen it on television. An ambulance pulls up to an emergency room. The paramedics have gathered some information and they've started some assessment and they've started some treatment. And they have a very short period of time while they're wheeling the gurney from the ambulance into the hospital to transfer information that's critical to the physicians. And so they may say something that is really short and really pointed. And the concept of huddles, as well as the next concept of SBAR, are practices to really structure effective communication at key decision points in a case. So huddles, actually for huddles, let's use a basketball analogy, right? So it's the fourth quarter, the team is down, the coach calls a timeout and has all the players come out for a huddle. It's really quick. It's the timeout only lasts a minute or two. So the coach says, all right, here's the plan that we're going to use. It's the, it's the post up that we've practiced before. We're going to get the ball to Guli as quickly as possible because she's tall and she can probably dunk. But we need, in order to do that, we need to get Duranlo in there because she's really good at posting up and blocking to make the space. So it's a really quick reference. Like the coach may hold up a flip chart that shows like X's and O's that reminds everyone, like, here's the plan, here's the resources that we need, here's how it's going to move forward. And then at the end, it's like, go team, we've got this, right? So that's what it would look like in sports. So in child welfare practices, huddles can be used at many, many different points during a case. So if a team has just gotten a new acceptance and they want to organize themselves around what do we know, what are the next steps in terms of gathering information, who's going to do that? A huddle can be a brief way to do that. If a team needs to, what's one of the toughest things? Go out after hours or conduct a removal of a child from a home. Those are going to be high risk, high consequence, high emotion points in a case where bringing a group of people together to talk things through is going to lead to better decisions, as well as a number of people who can divide tasks up, follow through on those tasks, loop back to one another at the end about what was done, what still needs to be done, and now finally we've closed the loop. So it's focused and short. Standing is going to be better than sitting because it keeps people engaged in a really focused conversation. It's important to honor the time frame. If you say a huddle is going to start at a certain time and end by 15 minutes, you want to honor that in the practice. And in the field guide, Mike Cull offers this acronym of PREP, prepare, gather any necessary information ahead of time and have that ready for everyone. At the beginning of the conversation, review. We're having a huddle. It's focused. Here's the task at hand so that everyone's really pointed in the right direction. And then review background information that's really relevant to what you're trying to accomplish. Then it's enact. And so that's where a team might need to say, all right, I had this on my agenda, but I can set that aside. I'm a resource. I can be available. Or a supervisor may need to talk to a district director or central office. You may need to pull in state police, right? So in order to enact your plan, you may need to be active with mobilizing resources. You want to maintain communication as you're carrying the plan forward. And then when the plan is done, close the loop so that everyone who was initially in the huddle now knows we've finished this, we can stop thinking about it, we can move on to other things. And before you end the huddle, whoever's leading it, whoever your safety culture cheerleader is, could be the supervisor, but it could be anyone, is just gonna, remind everyone, this is a big deal, but we've got this. We know what we're doing. We're professional. We just organized this plan. And even though we're gonna end this call now and go off and do this individually, we're only a phone call away from one another. So don't stress, we've got this, right? So it promotes this idea of resiliency that even when this call ends, you're not alone doing this work. So that's the idea of huddles. Cassie.
So we've got a cool question from Chris. He wants to know if there's research that examines the efficacy of the team-based approaches like staffings, huddles, etc., when conducted on online platforms as opposed to face-to-face.
Oh, that's such a good question. That is a question that there may be research to, but I don't know. And I'm going to get my handy pen and write that down. I'm happy to do some work and look into that.
And I bet Jen and Maria might have some info on that. And for you guys, Jen Agasti and Maria Gagnon are, they're part of the Safety Culture Work Group. They're part of the larger Safety Culture Work in New England. And my guess is that some folks are doing research right now about it, given that there's all these online platforms, but I don't know of any that exist yet.
Yeah, good question, Chris. We'll get back to you with what we learn. Okay. Keep going. All right. So some ideas that I had about remote huddles, and this is probably getting to some of what Chris was thinking about, is that when you're working in an office, there's always other people around. And so if you're in the office, calling a huddle may be as simple as walking down the hall to see who's available. No longer the case. And so in order to really know that when you want to have a huddle, it will be there, I think your unit team, your office would need to have some pre-existing operating agreements. So some might include what I have up here. So for example, it might be that we understand that people can't monitor and respond to their email immediately throughout the day. So we won't use email to initiate asking for a huddle, but we might do a group text. And who would be available on that group text would be something that would be talked about ahead of time. The text could include the urgency. It could include when you're suggesting that the huddle be kind of convened, when is it going to happen, and the purpose in the group text. That's short enough. But then you might want to send an email to those same people that includes a little bit more of the information that they might need to have handy, especially since we're remote. We can't all sit at a table together and look at the same information. It's important that no one feel like you always need to be available for one of these huddles. So teams should talk about under what circumstances is it okay when you get a group text to reply, I wish I could, I'm not available right now, and have those agreements in place so that we know that there will be people available, but it's not an additional stressor that you always have to respond. It's really important that you have someone who's identified in the beginning as the note taker, and that before you end the huddle, you have that note taker read their notes back to the group for agreement, right? So it's a group conversation. One person's catching their perception of who said they would do what. Before you end, read through the notes and make sure that any clarification that needs to can happen. And then once you end the huddle, and I'm picturing it, it's a Skype call or a Teams call, something like that. Once you end that call, then maintain how are we going to stay in touch, either to report my task is done or to reach out for additional help if we need that. There may be other operating agreements that we'll discover we need to have in place remotely, but I think talking ahead of time as unit teams about this stuff would be really, really helpful. Okay, looking at time, I have time to review SBAR, and then we'll get into breakout groups. So SBAR, like in the huddles, Mike Hall suggested this PrEP framework. So SBAR is a framework for a short, focused conversation, and it's really, really versatile. So this is where the paramedics coming out of the ambulance might say to the physician who's receiving the patient, here's the situation, Pete Cudney had a heart attack. And currently he's in VFib. Is that a thing? I think that's a thing. I don't know. And we've used the paddles once. Background, what you need to know about him is that he has really high cholesterol, and these are his contacts. His wife's been notified. She's on her way to the hospital. Oh, and he's allergic to latex gloves, so don't use latex gloves, right? So here's the situation. Here's the critical background information. Here's our assessment of what's going on for him and our recommendations. We think he needs this, this, and this. Here's what I would do. Now it's in your hands to further this assessment process forward. So this structure, if this is a structure that individuals and teams and FSD as a whole state finds to be useful, and I think you will, it can become familiar so that it could be used at a lot of different junctures in a case. Can you guys hear the F-35s in my background? Sorry about that. So I believe that this could be used to brief a supervisor. This could be used to brief legal folks, our attorneys, on what it is that's going on in a case and what we're thinking. It can be used potentially as a writing structure for affidavits. Your Honor, here's the situation. Here's the background around the case. Here's our assessment of risk and what we think needs to happen. Here's our recommendation, right? There's an affidavit structure. It could be used to brief a judge on the stand about a case. It can be used for case consults. So because it's so simple, it can help us avoid, I'm sure you've been in situations like this where someone knows that they need something, but they're not sure what it is that they need. And so they start talking about the case, and then other people start talking about the case. And then we're telling stories about other cases that are similar to this case. And we're slowly working our way into what we even need. SBAR is effective if people do a little bit of preparation ahead of time. And sometimes you need to reach out to a supervisor or a colleague to say, help me, is this where I should really be focused? And if you come in with that kind of focus, I think that this could be really useful across the state. I believe that huddles, SBAR, and Team is Secure Base are really actively being used out there right now. And so I'm going to skip that slide and let's go to breakout rooms. So it looks like we have, how much time do we have left, Cassie? 20 minutes?
Yeah, sorry, I was muted.
So let's go into breakout rooms. I'm going to set my timer for 12 minutes. I'll put you in breakout rooms, and I want you to think about these concepts: Team is Secure Base, the practice of huddles, the practice of SBAR, and then share with others. Are you using this in your team or district? If so, how? What does it look like in terms of habits and practices? And whether you're using these or not, how do these give you ideas that your team could improve your safety culture in your own unit team? I'll pay attention to the chat during this, but otherwise you'll have 12 minutes to just kind of chat together about this stuff. So let me do that.
Pete, once you get us in rooms, will you copy and paste those questions into the chat box?
I will do that, yeah.
Helps, thanks.
All right, so let's do 6 to 7 people in a room. Okay, there you go. Remember to unmute yourself when you get in there. Welcome back, everyone. Once everyone's back, we'll just open it up for questions as well as comments.
I have a comment. I like when we come back from breakout groups because everyone's camera is on and you can see everyone's face again. Oh, hey.
Yeah, breakout room does force that a little bit, doesn't it?
I know, it's nice. Look at all your faces. Ooh, Matt's doing a dance.
Okay, so at the risk of a lot of people talking at once, I would like to offer two options. First of all, sorry, I kept posting the questions in the chat, but I was the only one in my breakout room, so the chat didn't go to any of you guys. So hopefully you talked about something good. Either put ideas in the chat or unmute yourself if you have questions, if there's something that you're doing in your district related to this, if you heard an idea from someone else. Mostly what I'm hoping to do is plant some seeds and generate energy that continues building this safety culture. So who are the brave souls who want to unmute themselves or type some stuff into the chat? Questions or comments? Who's using this stuff? You are doing it, I know you are.
So I'll report out for our group in terms of a really cool idea that we talked about was St. Albans has started doing teams for their case aids during COVID, which is something that we talked about being really important and inclusive and thoughtful about including and making a secure base for folks that sometimes get left out of things that are a valuable part of our teams, but don't have that same secure base. Which I think will probably end up going to leadership in St. J so that we can be thoughtful about that. One of the other cool things St. Albans had talked about was doing pre-removal huddles, but also a debrief afterwards in a huddle. And that's something that I haven't experienced or done, but I thought would be kind of a cool thing. Like we get together, we rally beforehand, but oftentimes afterwards, there's not kind of that returning and debrief. So that was something else that I thought was pretty cool.
That's a great way to close loop and reflect back, right? That's excellent. Good. Who else? When I'm in person with you guys, you are not shy.
So I am. I was in a breakout group with a lot of people from intake, and it sounds like huddles are used. Most of them are using huddles in that sense, and they found that very helpful. I liked one of them, and I can't remember which office it was. They are doing and they are meeting in a park to do team meetings, like their huddles. Which I thought was really great in the virtual world,
Mm-hmm. That's great. Any questions? Is there anything that anyone in any of the leadership positions related to this kind of stuff want to reinforce?
Sure. This is Brenda Gooley. I'll just jump in and say I really enjoyed and appreciated the conversation that we had in our breakout session. There was some level of sharing, like, here's what we're doing, what we're not doing, but then the conversation deepened around really, putting out some vulnerable feelings about, how you have safe space to make a mistake, and that's okay, and how do you access kind of the support of your team and your supervisor in the context of what you're holding, and what shuts you down around that versus what opens you up around that. And I was really struck by the ways that these tools, whether it's the SBAR or the huddle, for example, that we really want to ground them in Team as Secure Base and really recognize that is the a cornerstone of what we're really wanting to accomplish here. And there are aspects of the work that are frustrating. I mean, one of the examples that was shared was, placement. Every day we're looking for a placement. We can't find a placement. And I kind of saw there was this, it could be that if the huddle is the tool that we use to address placement crises and we're always feeling stuck around that, that's a really hard thing. And just wanting to reframe that into that here's this place of anxiety that we're holding that's really difficult, and wanting to bring Team as Secure Base around that difficult moment, and kind of to kind of always make sure we're grounding ourselves in that aspect of what we're doing.
That's great. That sounds like a really nice conversation. I wish that we had more time for those breakout discussions. I mean, that's where the real generative learning and creation happens. but we don't have more time, and we have to save a couple minutes for our survey about this at the end. So my colleagues and I, we're available to help teams design practices to build these habits. If you want, reach out to us, okay? This is just the planting of the seeds. Cassie, thank you. So it looks like, I don't know if that's a clickable link or if you have to cut and paste that, but that'll take you to our online survey. And there's the 3 bits of information that you need for it. The title that you enter can just be really simple, safety culture. And then today's date and my name, Pete Cudney. And in addition to this recording, I'll share the slide set if anyone wants that. I'll share the PDF of the toolkit, and I'll also share the article, the research article about TMIS Secure Base. And then to Chris's question, when Cassie or I find more research, we'll share that out with folks as well about whether there's anything with remote. Cassie?
Yeah, I know we've kind of tossed out there a bunch of times, like it's on our website, but I wanted to be explicit that there's a week at least lag before we get them up. And there was a little bit of a longer lag in the beginning. So in about a week, you'll be able to access this one and all the resources. Right now, microlearnings 1, 2, 4, and 5 are up. And so, you know, they just kind of come up as we finish them. We need to upload them. And then you guys probably all saw, or maybe saw, there's a podcast that's been coming out that we've just started to put together. And the reason I'm mentioning that is a new invitation for the next microlearning will come out for next Tuesday. And Tabitha's doing that with Kate Brayton and Mark Wenberg. They're going to be talking about restorative practices. And I'm 90% sure we're going to be able to get the podcast episode that goes with it out first. So it'll be like a nice little paired thing. But like everything else we're doing during COVID, it's, you know, we're trying, we'll see. So stay tuned for more on that.
Thanks, Cassie. Great. All right. Thank you all. I hope it was helpful. If not, let me know. Okay. Bye.